On the motion that, assuming feasibility, this House will create soldiers without the sense of pain, let's invite the Prime Minister to propose the motion.
Don't lie.
Mr. Speaker, we think that war is a tragedy. It's a tragedy that we have to fight wars. But we think that when wars happen, it's more of a tragedy because our soldiers have to go through immense pain. To have their legs cut off, shot in the eye, to have their brains exploded. We think that this kind of pain that they go through is extremely regretful. And on our side of the house, what we want to do is we want to be humane. We want to eliminate that pain, Mr. Madam Speaker. So we want to eliminate that pain so they don't have to go through that suffering. And we're more than proud to propose on our side of the house. So what are we going to do? We're going to eliminate the psychological pain that they go through, such as PTSD, or the physical pain they actually go through, right? We're not going to force this. This can be voluntary. We're going to make it voluntary so that they can choose, Mr. Madam Speakers. We're also going to impose it, so I've done it both. We're also going to allow police officers and firefighters to choose it if they so want. When we do this, we're also going to give adequate information on what kind of consequences they go through so that they can be adequately counseled.
Under square level.
Isn't it creating soldiers, not making them choose into allowing them to get rid of that ability to feel
A
free?
creation is, this is what creation is. It's new creation, right? Ladies and gentlemen, we also think that if you don't want to opt into this, that's pretty much fine, right? It's up to you to choose. Furthermore, we also say that after the war is over and whatnot, because we're assuming that technology exists, our technology is pretty good, right? You can trigger back your pain if you want to have a normal life again, okay? So in other words, you can also retain those kind of traits if you want. We say that fear, of course, will still be there as a human being. Just because you don't feel pain, that doesn't mean you don't have fear. It also means that guilt as a soldier or guilt as a human being, that sense will still be there. Compassion will still be there, right? We want to clarify that. So let's go into our arguments. I want to first clarify what the unique nature of soldiers are. We say that, firstly, soldiers are different from other occupations in that they have to, it's a combating nature. They're constantly exposed to pain. They're in a war zone where people are trying to kill them. People who are trying to attack them. So that means during the course of the war, when you see movies like Saving Private Ryan, you will see soldiers on the ground, their intestines coming out, you will see fire shots being exchanged, them being attacked, right? You will also see them suffering and crying out for help as they are delivered to the hospital in order to get their legs amputated. These kinds of pain are constant, not only psychologically, but also physically as well, which is why we think that the experience as a soldier of this occupation is extremely tragic and sad. No, thank you. Secondly, we also say that as a soldier, because you're fighting a war for your country, you need to be able to carry out operations efficiently for you to win wars for millions of people. That also means that, let's say for example, you're injured because you stepped on a landmine and you lose your leg. That slows down the entire team because their team needs to cater for your needs. That also means that when you get shot or when you get attacked and you're feeling immense pain, you initially feel a lot of shock, which is why you can't concentrate on your missions, right? For that reason, that lowers your concentration because human beings are physical animals nonetheless, which is why that impedes your ability to carry out operations extremely efficiently in such situations. Yes, I'm being very generous.
But it's the pain and the suffering of these soldiers which are so emotional resonant which prevents the public from entering into the war to begin with. You're taking that away, so therefore there's more incentive for the states to actually send these troops there.
No, because policymakers don't take into the calculus of whether these people feel pain or not when they make a decision as to whether they really need to respond to an attack or whether they need to, invade a certain area so that they need to take down a dictatorship or stop a genocide, right? Those kinds of considerations are currently not as much of a big thing, right? More importantly, we also say that just because they don't feel pain, that doesn't mean they don't fear losing their lives, right? And people still care about their lives nonetheless, which is why we don't think that point should stand, right? So let's go into our argument, second argument in terms of moral obligation. We think that the state has an important moral obligation in in terms of reducing their pain if we can, right? With this technology, assuming that we do have this technology, not giving it to them basically means that we're sending them knowing that they're going to go through extensive pain. We think as a moral government, we shouldn't be doing that. If they want the option of saying, I don't want to go through this physical pain when I get shot or whatnot, we think the government ought to give them that choice, right? Because it's ultimately a choice that they need to make. We think that's extremely important. So, final argument, the benefits. What are some benefits? I think I already inferred. I think you can guess an inference. Firstly, we say that when you're injured, it means you're not in pain, right? That allows you to carry out operations extremely efficiently. That means your combating power or your combating efficiently allows you to complete operations extremely well. That's extremely important because efficient militaries allow for the reduction of casualties. And that means you save more lives. It not only means you save more soldiers, it means, for example, in a camp where you have to save refugees or save people from being massacred, it means you're able to, move that extra step to prevent the other side from first shooting the gun. That means you're able to save more lives in this kind of case. It means you're able to reduce the duration of war much more better, and that means saving more lives. We think that's the most important thing. We also say that when it comes to military training, a lot of soldiers undergo extreme and intensive military training in order for them to get used to the pain, right? That's why you see extreme like special ops and whatnot. During the training process, they intentionally inflict pain upon their soldiers so that they can get used to these kind of things. We think that training itself now becomes unnecessary because, to a large part, they no longer have to feel pain anymore. And we think in this sense, it makes training much more humane in this regard, which we think is a major benefit to begin with. Final argument, and I want to also emphasize a lot about this regarding PTSD, which is that this also takes away PTSD. A lot of soldiers, when they come back home, what happens? They end up unemployed. They can't serve anymore because they have a missing leg. But a lot of what happens is they go through extreme post-traumatic stress disorder. They hear a dog barking and they attack the dog. They hear certain sounds that are crashing sounds or large sounds. They suddenly it's a surprise. They also become extremely violent, which makes it impossible to live a normal family life, to get a job. We take away this and give them back their normal lives because they don't have to go through all that psychological pain anymore. We think that's extremely important because we need to take care of the aftermath of our soldiers, which is something that we are not adequately doing in the status quo. Ladies and gentlemen, we are creating soldiers who don't feel pain because this is the new birth of our soldiers. We think in this sense, we're being moral because we're taking away an unnecessary part. That's what I mean.
Right, we thank the Prime Minister for opening the case of the opposition side. Now I invite the leader of the opposition.
We should not be proud of war. What did the Prime Minister tell us in today's speech? We think that their first argument is completely true. We concede to this. You quote-unquote tell us that soldiers are going to be able to complete operations more efficiently. Yes, you will. Even if you take a bullet in your arm, you will feel no pain. Even if your comrade takes a bullet in his arm, you will feel no pain, including emotional pain. But without this technology, Mr. Speaker, even without this motion, we think that during war, we have killed enough people. We have killed millions of people even without this technology. We think that war on its own is effective enough. Now, what we have to realize here is that what's most important in the situation of war is that prior to the war, the public needs to be informed about the harms of it. The public needs to be able to check the state, check the military, and check the government so that they're unable to randomly carry out operations ruthlessly. We think that they fundamentally take away the power of the state and the public to make that decision. So before we move on into our arguments, in which we're going to integrate most of our responses to their case, let's first of all clarify a few things. First of all, Mr. Speaker, the model that we propose on side opposition is a complete riddance of this technology to begin with. We want this technology to be gone, just like the way that the Non-Proliferation Treaty for nuclear weapons forces and compels individual states to get rid of nuclear weapons. We want the same thing to happen for this technology as well. But let's analyze her model and break it down. We think that first of all, this is slightly swirling the motion, since it says that we're going to create soldiers, not necessarily extend current soldiers the ability to do so. But second of all, because we want to be generous and because we're kind people, let us assume that we agree to their characterization, Mr. Speaker. We still don't think that it will actually be an informed and voluntary choice. Because first of all, who as a soldier or a firefighter would like to not take the lucrative option of not feeling any pain, right? But second of all, even if you wanted to opt out of it, we think that the commander or the hierarchical structure of the military will basically force you to take upon that option, especially because of the various benefits that their higher officials are going to suggest to them. So I ultimately don't believe that this is going to be an effective, personal, and informed choice. But the last thing that we want to emphasize here is that the various clarifications that the Prime Minister makes simply makes their case extremely soft. Because when they talk about things like emotional pain won't exist, they're going to be able to experience the pain anyway. We think that if their ultimate goal is to maximize efficiency in war, you are unable to achieve that purpose because they are still going to experience things like emotional pain. But even without that premise set, we think that our arguments will still be valid. Having said that, let's move on to our first contention, why war becomes an extremely easy decision and why pain is so important in the context of war. Mr. Speaker, pain is what allows people to understand and empathize with other individuals. That if I can feel pain, then you can and will feel pain as well. But we think that soldiers having no pain means that when you take a bullet in your head or in your arm, you don't get hurt. You assume that when others take a bullet in their arm, they don't feel no pain as well, especially when it's your comrade. And this is exactly why, Mr. Speaker, in the case of the United States using drone simulations, soldiers become significantly less hesitant to kill innocent civilians in villages that have committed no fault against the military in the first place. So we think that by their policy, this actually aggravates the situation in two ways. We want to emphasize that, first of all, even prior to the war, even prior to committing and making the decision to participate in the war, it takes away the public's informed choice. It takes away their check and balance. Because it's the suffering of our soldiers, it's the PTSD that they go through, the stress that we know they undergo during war, the scenes on TV that show people bleeding and out of their intestines, the very scenes that they describe on side government, yelling, "Help me, I'm hurt," that allows the public to make a decision to stop the government from going to war. We rely on the citizens and the public in the status quo to tell the government and impose a doubt, is this a necessary war to fight? Aren't our soldiers going to get hurt? We think that these questions are extremely necessary, not just in terms of getting rid of a limit on our budget, but second of all, also in terms of making conscientious and moral choices as a public and as a state. And we think that their policy gets rid of that check and balance, because we no longer have to care for our soldiers. Our soldiers aren't going to feel pain, whether it be emotional or physical, Mr. Speaker. That's why we think that we resort to war automatically whenever there's a provocation from another state. Thank you, sit down, you're disturbing me. We think that this is easy decisions to resort to war. We believe that that's ultimately harmful. But secondly, and perhaps more importantly, we think that it is also going to make, lead people to make easy decisions during the war, that you're going to make unwise and inhumane choices. Because the fact that you feel no pain means that you are not human. And that's a fundamental characteristic that makes us human to begin with. This, from the commander's perspective, and especially from the government's perspective, makes these soldiers products. And we are not robots, we are humans, Mr. Speaker. Let me explain to you the importance of feeling that. We think that it becomes much more easier under their circumstance for commanders especially to make ruthless choices and demand that their soldiers and their comrades make ruthless choices, and for the soldiers to ruthlessly obey them, right? If there are civilians getting in the way, for example, if there's a village getting in the way for your path, for your journey to attack the enemy, you are no longer going to be unwilling to kill them. You're no longer be willing to destroy villages because you know that no matter what happens, you aren't going to get hurt. But furthermore, and most importantly, you aren't going to realize the pain that these villagers suffer through as well. You aren't going to experience the pain that these innocent civilians go through, and that's why there's no such thing such as camaraderie when you know that your colleagues are not going to get hurt. There are no such things as wise choices, when in fact every decision seems wise, especially when it benefits your side. It exploits the mentality of war, and we think that that is fundamentally problematic. We think that this also makes war extremely ineffective and extremely harmful, because by not experiencing the pain, you are unable to sympathize with the civilians on ground. Just like we as humans can't see all the colors that an ant sees, we think that no one is ultimately going to be able to empathize with the people on ground. Whereas that is an extremely important strategy to use in war. No, thank you. When in fact we believe that understanding the people's sympathy and actually empathizing with them leads to more citizenship, leads to actually being able to reach out for help from these civilians, that you should tell us about the terrain in that territory, for example, or you should tell us the best strategies to employ. Once we carry out these missions, once we carry out their model, these benefits are going to disappear. Having said that, let's move on to our second point about why this actually provides a dangerous leverage to our enemies as well. Why are nuclear weapons dangerous, Mr. Speaker? We think that it's dangerous because it can get into the hands of terrorists. There's a potential for other enemies, the state of Iran, to take a hold of it and create more nuclear weapons themselves. The same thing applies in today's space. If this technology exists too, under our current world, what's going to happen is that there is always huge risk that our enemies, that these terrorist organizations, who by the way aren't going to be willing to have the checks and balances that they suggest on side governments, are going to exist. And once this technology is available to the world, once there's that huge potential that it is available to terrorists, this principle makes the world extremely dangerous. They're going to have more suicide bombers because even in the process of bombing yourself up, you aren't going to feel any pain. They have no necessity to now carry out training methods in order to prevent them from feeling pain from torture, which makes it much easier for enemies or terrorists to carry out their operations even when they're extremely inhumane. So the very benefits that you described to us in our second argument apply to other enemies that we don't want them to benefit as well. And so for all of these reasons, because we think that this leads us to not become human, to become inhumane, and to become ruthless, we are more than proud to oppose.
Representing the Leader of the Opposition, would like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister.
You can hear the hesitation in their voices.
So, Mr. Speaker, we believe that the Kim opposition doesn't understand the war and soldiers and hierarchy of the battlefield, right? Just because soldiers is not gonna take a pain or they feel the pain, that doesn't mean commanders say we will deploy more. We will not deploy more. The things deters commanders from deploying more soldiers in the more dangerous battlefield is the life of the soldiers. Right? If more soldiers will die, then doesn't matter because we'll be pissed off. We will say to Park Geun-hye or Obama, we don't like your war. That is why all their argument cannot be stand in today's debate, right? With that, I have one argument. Why their policy makes soldiers second-class citizens and less soldiers will be recruited by our government because they're treating our soldiers shit. And before we go to my first argument, I have a couple of responses, right? I said it's going to be easy decision to the combat troops, right? Like I said before, pain doesn't deter, like the combat commanders deploying soldiers from the putting in very, very dangerous situation. But more than that, we think that it is happening now. Because like my first speaker clearly said, during the training, we will give them a immoral training, inhumane training. Because we want them to, resist the pain. Because everybody knows the pain deters ability of combat troops. Also no response from the ground. We think this is the problem, right? They said it is not going to be informed choices.
Sure.
We think this is going to be very informed choices. Being a soldier is an informed choices, right? They said commander is going to force them to do something. That is why my first speaker said there is a clause. If you force these people, then they will get a lot of money. That is why they can't force these soldiers. But even if that is true, I think this is way better. Because currently, all the soldiers forced by commanders and fighting against other countries' soldiers and getting a lot of pain. We want to get rid of that pain. That is why our policy is way more better than their policy, right? They said we will have a more war. I don't think that is true. Because people, society, and citizens respond to the empathy, sentiment against the certain war, right? If there is the necessary war, then regardless of the pain, we will deploy them. If there is unnecessary war, we will discuss and debate. We are not going to send in these troops, even if they are right. So we can't have a necessary war because we are afraid of imposing the pain to the individual soldiers. We think that it's worse. Because more people should be dead because of they think that is the problems, right? More than that, my first circular saying it makes more effective war and combating it. That is why we will see more effective, achieving the goal of the fight. We think this is the great stuff. But even if they actually okay, we don't want to give them because they have a war. We don't care. If there's a war because of this technology, we should. Because we tell them, go there and fight instead of us. Because of you, we can have a productive life. Because of you, I can have a loved one. Because of you, I can be a member of the society. When you don't want to give them technology because of more work, you are ignoring and betraying these soldiers. We think this is bad. You shouldn't talk about government because I'm pissing off because I am a retired soldier, right? What about soldiers' perspective? Like my first speaker clearly said, they are getting unnecessary pain. Just imagine if you're amputated because of stupid, like the enemy, then it is unnecessary pain. You shouldn't go through that pain just because you are protecting us and our society, right? We think this is wrong. We shouldn't do this. And they have a very, very the offensive argument. They said if you don't pain, you can't emphasize the citizens. No, not every soldier gets pain. That means 80% of the soldiers is not empathized anyway. Then there must be a more problem. If they say only 10% of the people is getting injured or 100% soldiers are getting injured, then our policy is very necessary. Because 100% of our soldiers getting unnecessary pain, right? That is why we are more better than you. Yes.
You talked about why we're not going to be able to fight necessary wars. Can you seriously say that the absence of this technology has led the U.S. to fight less wars than necessary?
No. That was your argument. Our argument was about we want to give them a better treatment, better, like welfare, right? That is why we don't want them to go through stupid pain, amputated, right? Amputated. huge problems. We also talked about the PTSD. No response whatsoever. Think about it, right? Many soldiers having this stupid, disease, right? Problem. But we are doing a very ineffective treatment. Why we don't use the good technology which can prevent PTSD, right? No response whatsoever. Some soldiers cannot have a proper life because dog barking. I thought, Iraq soldiers coming to me. That is why he used the gun, kill his family members. This is a tragedy. But the bigger problem is even if I don't get any PTSD, some companies in society, my friend, assumes because I'm from the Iraq, that is why I have PTSD. These people blocked by the social life. We think this is the problem, right? So we think that's bad. And they said enemy can do this. Doesn't matter. Even if enemy can use this, even if there's a possibility, we are not going to be not use this technology, right? If there's good technology, we have to use this. Many weapons are saying missiles, great missiles might be used by Iron Man, right? Because we want to do this. Even if you totally get rid of this, these people is going to kidnap, scientists and make a good thing. That is happening in the nuclear weapons, so doesn't matter, right? So let's move on to my argument. Why is it problems, right? Soldiers think that they are sacrificing themselves to protect our society, and they think they are sacrificing a lot, right? That is why they don't want privileges because we love them, but they want to get same treatment, right? When government said, even if we have a technology giving you a great pleasure, giving you a great welfare, but we don't want to give you because there is high possibility enemies might use them. There is high possibility we might have more war. The soldiers is going to be very angry and pissed off, right? Because they think that government don't want to give me enough treatment and welfare. We think this is the problem because we, society and soldiers, we have the ideas, they are treating me as a second-class citizen. Why this is the problem? It harms the morale of the soldiers, right? It harms the recruitment of the soldiers because soldiers don't want to sacrifice themselves when government shut them out from the great treatment and great technology. We think this is the problems, right? We have a responsibility, dude. We have a great responsibility. When people are suffering pain because of us, because to protect our society, you and your friends, we must provide them enough treatment, enough welfare. Our policy can provide it. They can. That is why we strongly propose this mission.
Correct. Thank the Deputy Leader, Deputy Prime Minister. Would like to invite the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Madam Chair, it's quite unfortunate that a formative bench is actually underestimating the value of pain. Because the way in which you appreciate joy a lot more is because of pain, right? The reason why you actually do feel guilty is because you are so scared of the psychological pain that you're actually going to go through. Therefore, it removes an entire array of emotions, which is quite dangerous if actually the soldiers wouldn't have it. There's three important questions which I'm going to answer in today's debate, to which my rebuttals and arguments will be integrated, as always. So the first one is this: how do you really prevent war? The first question is, ladies and gentlemen, is that you need to have a public which is against it to begin with, which is against unnecessary war, ladies and gentlemen. And it's the stories of the sufferings of the soldiers, ladies and gentlemen, which is so emotional resonance towards the public, which actually makes him not want to have, ladies and gentlemen, another war, for them to say never again. It's a PTSD of soldiers, which tells the public of the horrors of war, ladies and gentlemen, that we're not supposed to subject the soldiers into the battlefield, ladies and gentlemen. We do think, yeah, there are some necessary wars that we have to fight, and we do think that they can actually show and make the public want to actually send the troops by showing the humanitarian necessity for these things, ladies and gentlemen. But there are a lot of unnecessary wars that we're entering, ladies and gentlemen, even though we don't think that there's no real humanitarian need. Talk about Iraq, for example. The only thing that they said is that, well, they're going to go through PTSD. First response is that PTSD, ladies and gentlemen, is an occupational risk. It's something which they consented to begin with.
Exactly.
But we do think, ladies and gentlemen, that unlike Britain, for example, the United States did have like a really good PTSD program before, right? It's only nowadays that it's actually adopting a lot of psychological measures to actually make sure that it's actually a preventer. So we do think that that harm is mitigatable by having more PTSD programs for psychology, like counseling, what have you. But the second thing that you have to respond to, you have to understand, is that PTSD is a disorder which can be addressed through therapy anyway, right? So the best way to end it is to actually have more PTSD programs, ladies and gentlemen, members of today's debate. So next question therefore, and that kind of resonance is something that you're taking away in a affirmative bench. Next question is this: how do you really win a war? We agree that it's not simply about the military hardware that you're supposed to have, but you should have a capacity to win the hearts and minds of the international community as well as the community, which terrain, ladies and gentlemen, is so important, especially in terms of in Afghanistan and Taliban, territory terrains which your foreign soldiers are not very familiar with, ladies and gentlemen. The reason why Brits are more effective than Americans, Peter Gibbs not here. It's not just because Brits are more culturally sensitive, I'm not sure if it's true, but they have actually more programs, right? Instead of wearing helmets, for example, what the Brits do is they wear Afghan, traditional Afghan hats in order for them to say that we're one with each other. We have a shared humanity, ladies and gentlemen, to show that they are one, that they have a shared humanity, ladies and gentlemen, so just like the local community, so that the local community wouldn't be adverse towards them. This is one way of humanizing the war, ladies and gentlemen, for the people or for the community is stop badgering me to actually side with them. Therefore, more locals would actually help the soldiers in the terrains, will actually help them and make sure that we wouldn't get recruited to become terrorists at the end of the day, and make sure that we're going to pinpoint which ones are the Taliban, which ones are the terrorists. But let's take a look at the policy. No, sit down. What does affirmative policy do? What it does that is deprives the capacity of pain, which deepens the enemy's feeling that they are the other, that they're very different. The idea that there's really no shared humanity, largely because they don't feel the same emotions that we actually do so. And that's dangerous, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to have that kind of affinity with a particular community, ladies and gentlemen. But the second thing, why we don't think we're going to win the war with your particular policy, is that if you don't get rid of this technology, what will most likely happen is that it will spread. All the benefits that they talked about, the idea of your soldiers being more focused, the idea that your soldiers wouldn't have PTSD, are benefits which enemies would also have. So whatever benefits that you have of your soldiers will simply be offset by the fact that your enemies also have it, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, we do think that the best way that we have to do is to destroy any research, to crack down on any form of research that these people are actually conducting. Just as much as we've cracked down on landmines, for example, as nuclear weapons, we have to wipe them out because it poses a grave threat in both sides, ladies and gentlemen. And before I move on, yes.
Right, so this technology, even if we don't use it, we're assuming that it exists, right? So if the enemy uses it and we don't use it,
yeah, so we destroy it, right? Every research is there, right? We have to destroy this particular technology because the thing is that that's particularly harmful. That's the reason why there was a counter proposal coming from the negative bench. So the last question in today's debate is this. How do you really have a just war? We've talked about the idea of whistleblowing particularly important internally. Because there are a lot of violations being conducted by, for example, not generals, but the people who are on the ground, like commanders, for example. We do see a lot of violations of the Geneva Convention, ladies and gentlemen, of people of breaking the entire community or burning down certain villages. What's happening in their particular policy is they remove pain, is they're also removing the idea of fear. Pain is what I talked to you about, ladies and gentlemen. It's a part of an entire wide range of emotions. You want to appreciate things like joy, for example, if you do not have pain. You appreciate it more, like the joys in life, because he wants to, when you want to escape like pain, ladies and gentlemen. You won't have fear, because the reason why you won't have fear, largely because you won't have fear, largely because pain is there, because you are so scared of the fear of pain. So these two things are actually quite interrelated with each other. And the idea is that you're claiming that you wouldn't have any guilt. We see that's not true. The reason why you have guilt is because of the psychological pain that you have whenever you remember something, right? So we do think that these things are all interrelated. If you remove pain from that entire equation, we do think that all forms of emotions will also be affected by it. Therefore, you will be a completely emotionless human being at the end of the day. So without pain, ladies and gentlemen, it's hard for you to remember what actually happened. It's hard for you to know exactly what are the wrong things which are committed. Your moral calculus is also being impacted by the absence of that particular fear, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, it's hard for you to appreciate that a certain atrocity is an atrocity, because you wouldn't recognize the pain of the other, because you can't feel pain yourself. We say, therefore, in military tribunals, for example, you wouldn't be able to say, like the accounts that actually happened. It's hard for you to whistleblow and tell the entire world, or the tribunal, or the entire community of what happened, ladies and gentlemen, and to report about all these things. Having said all these things, I do think, ladies and gentlemen, if you remove the capacity of individuals, of the soldiers, to actually feel pain, what will happen is that it will be harder for you to be able to report, but secondly, it's also hard for you to try to humanize the war. People will not identify with you and the cost that you have. You will not win the war, the war of the hearts and minds, ladies and gentlemen. That's a grave cost towards it. But what is the punitive benefit that you actually wanted? The punitive benefit simply is that we don't want these soldiers to feel these unnecessary things. But the point is that they stand out for these things. The point is that you send them to these unnecessary wars. Maybe the best thing you're supposed to do is to not even send them to begin with. Having said all these things, it's quite clear we're going to be the champions, right?
Right, I think the previous speaker would like to invite the government to speak.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're hearing from the opposition that is suggesting masochism, and it's being provided to you by three sadists, that we must impose unnecessary pain to people that we have put in dangerous way, which is not necessary, but we'll do it anyway. We think that this is pervasive. We think this is cruel. We think this is disgusting. And we think that in that regard, proposition wins, because we are here to minimize that kind of unnecessary devastation for the soldiers that risk their lives to preserve our freedoms and our liberties. I have basically three clusters of issues. I don't think they're like clashes as much as they're main three issues. The first issue will be talking about the elements of physical pain. The second will be talking about psychological pain. Third will be about the intricacies of war and how the warfare changed. Before that, just a few small tidbits. Brits are smarter than Americans. That doesn't mean that Americans don't feel pain. It just simply means that Brits are better at strategy. I don't really think that this is an issue where Americans already can't feel pain, and therefore this is happening. Yes, you just politically go and have empathy with the culture of the people that you're trying to fight with, but we think that this has nothing to do with the debate. Now, that being said, we think that first of all, we need to think about certain things about the first category, the physical pain. Physical pain, is it necessary? Not really in this context. Because we told you, as a soldier who needs to risk their life and limb on these situations, why is phantom pain necessary for you to be able to sympathize with the situation in context? Why is it that you need to have the constant pain in your arm to be able to talk about the merits of war? We believe in these contexts, the pain that we talk about in terms of physical pain is very specific in terms of its context. Yes, you'll still lose a limb. Yes, you'll still lose a life. But in the process, why do you have to agonize for 14 hours and bleed out? In the process, feeling your guts coming out of your body. We think this pain is unnecessary. That pain doesn't have to be there. And we will create with the new technology that we have to at least spare them from that additional suffering. We think this is a utilitarian calculus that loses nothing in the process, at least for the personal experiences of these soldiers. Number two, is this also going to make these people psychopaths? We said that we're going to create painless soldiers, not stupid soldiers, or not psychopathic soldiers. We totally reject the idea that, especially in this context, we're not creating an embryo that will grow up in one of those sci-fi situations where I have never known pain in my life. We're talking about people only up until recently, like 3 months or so, or 2 years. They were normal human beings. They know what pain is. They know how to empathize. But furthermore, they also confuse the concept of reciprocity of you feel pain, I feel pain, from the more noble aspect of what we all do is basic ethics. We know that we do not want to kill people that are innocent because we are good human beings. We have rationality, we have education, and it goes beyond your capacity to feel immense, unnecessary pain. Second, let's assume that we already have those kind of psychopaths. If we look at certain cases like Vietnam, they happen to do that whether they feel personal pain or not. We have something called the Geneva Convention. We have international law and domestic law, regardless of whether you do this because you feel pain or not. That is illegal. And if you conduct that, you will go to jail and you will get shot. So we don't really think that this is something that's going to change anything in the long run. So in other words, is it a prerequisite to do all of these bad actions? No, it is not. But here's a problem. Their whole case presides on the fact that this new technology will create harms. And those harms are unempathetic, unfeeling, mass murdering, civilian slaughtering soldiers. But if that is not the prerequisite of those behaviors or the preconditions of those things, then their harms also don't exist. This whole point about PlayStation mentalities because of drones is a totally separate issue. It's because you're distant from the war field, not because you can't feel pain. But furthermore, they said that, oh, it's so scary because the terrorists might use it. Two questions. They don't care anyway. Most of the bad people we're talking about don't really have regards for their soldiers. They'll still to die. I don't really think that this is something that we want to talk about. They'll be more efficient and effective in that matter. But even then, so they can't feel pain as well. Why is that necessarily a big harm to the point that it's weapons of mass destruction levels or we need to get rid of everything? Please sit down. They did talk about efficiency, but we talk about efficiency in the sense of self-pride as a soldier that have volunteered in the situation, that I want to serve my country better, and we told you that the options that should be still there. We also told you that if the technology exists, the bad guys are not going to show as much restraint as we do. Even if we do assume whatever harm that does exist, they're going to still use it anyway. We don't necessarily lose out from it, but we do also lose out from the fact that we're not going to allow our people to be able to use so. Not now. Second, psychological harm in two ways. First is about the actual psychological distress. PTSD, shell shock. This is also a form of pain. We also told you there will be a separate form. We'll be able to prevent this. His response is, we have treatment. We'll solve it after it happens. And after he kills his third dog and beats his wife and becomes an alcoholic. We tell you prevent it because we have the technology. We'll condition you so that you don't have to feel that pain in the first place. So we do, even in the comparison, we do a much better job. But furthermore, we believe, again, they do not respond to the idea that we want to do this because we don't want them to feel that pain in the first place because it's humane. They want them to experience that pain, suffer from it, and maybe get cured or not. We think that even in this comparison, that it is unnecessary. Again, what did I tell you? This is masochism prescribed by sadists. And that is the only justification I can see from them supporting this. Yes, ma'am?
So let's say that everything you say are right, but the government relies on public sentiment. They no longer have
that's my third cluster. That's my third cluster. But before that, though, another psychological distress is this. If the technology exists, And some rich guy can do it because he has money, so I don't want to feel paid. The firefighters, police officers, the technology exists, that's the assumption. But under your rules of debate, you need to go against emotion, and you deny this to soldiers. This hurts them psychologically, their morale, their sense of worth. Why am I denied when I'm the one that's also going to be the one that protects your liberties in the first place? Why am I only singled out for this? Why am I a second-class citizen all of a sudden? Never responded. Nobody's going to join the military anymore. Right now, they will join anyway because this technology doesn't exist. Now you're being discriminated. What would that do to morale and future recruitment? Never responded. Third, the war. Wars don't happen because how much pain do you think my soldiers are going to feel? When North Korea invades Seoul, you're going to do it anyway. If you have a mass genocide, you're not going to go, but what about the touchy-feelies of our soldiers? It's not a calculation that we make. Wars are necessary, wars happen. We told you if it was necessary wars, it's going to happen either or not, they feel pain. We don't stop wars because people feel pain. We feel sympathy alone, even if that's the case, when they come back in caskets. They're dead. But even if that's not the case, there are necessary wars. Are you saying you're not going to fight the wars that we need to? We are saying that there are wars that we need to fight anyway. When those wars happen, we want our soldiers at least to not have to suffer the additional unnecessary pain that is associated with it. In the end of the day, this debate is simple. They have no unique harms. We have unique benefits. Make that calculation in your head. Please vote for government today.
Congratulating the previous, would like to invite Shin with.
너무 잘생겼대. handsome.
You see no hesitation from the voice.
Mr. Speaker, we're not saying that this technology will make psychopath soldiers, but we're saying that this will make sociopath soldiers. They will to empathize with the pain that others go through. We find this problematic, and through my classes, although I'm not a public speaking style like the previous whip speaker, more of a classic whip speaker, I'm going into detail why we have to take the debate. The first issue that I'm going to talk about is about effectiveness of the war. And then secondly, I will majorly talk about what kind of world we live in. So firstly, on the effectiveness of the war. But before this question, we first need to question ourselves, what is the goal of the war at the first place? Is it to efficiently and effectively kill as many people as possible? We don't think so. We think the goal of the war is to oftentimes win a military objective, which is not only encountering enemies, but in the case of humanitarian intervention, it's also about preserving human rights. That's why, and agreeing with the characteristic of the Prime Minister that war itself is a tragic event, that is why we try to minimize it and reduce it as much as possible. Then they question us. The only response throughout their whole speech is that just because you don't feel pain doesn't mean that you don't feel guilt. That's why I'm going to talk about why pain is in fact the root of guilt and fear and other kinds of human feelings that are necessary. We think that if you don't feel pain, you don't feel guilt. Why? For instance, parallel example about animal rights. The reason why we cherish animal rights, or we actually made up the term called animal rights, is because humans go through pain. Because humans go through pain, we assume that those living beings will also feel similar pain that we go through. That is why we have made the term called animal rights, and we actually try hard not to hurt these animals, because we assume the pain that we go through will be going through and going things like that. No, hopefully sit down. Okay. Only when we feel, that's when we sympathize. That's why the stories of past glories of war, how during the war, winning the war, we had to go through this excessive pain. Those kind of glories are not only the story that makes us proud, but it's also a story that makes us sympathize and tries to prevent those kind of tragic events as much as possible. Secondly, we think that it leads to less of sensitivity. That's why the ideas about like PlayStation, like drones, is actually perfectly applicable here, because the moment you lose sensitivity, and even if they claim us that you are still in the field of war, we think that levels of sensitivity will be lessened because you yourself do not feel pain, and that's why we think they lose the ability to sympathize with others. They claim that they still think that lives are important, but we think life, as they characterize, it's not about life itself, but it's about how we live, or what feelings we go through when we live. That's what we think. Now what they are trying to create a world is war, determining its like number of lives that we have sacrificed, but we think that we are just limiting there how many lives we have sacrificed, not about how much tragedy that the soldiers of our nation have gone through, and how much tragedy it have caused to the enemies, or it have caused to the communities that war actually happened. Also, they say things about like afraid. The analogy coming here from our second speaker is that because we feel afraid, the psychological pain that the other stakeholder will go through, that is when we feel guilt. And because of that reason, we told you how if we don't have pain, we don't feel guilt. And that leads to detrimental problems prior to the war, because it loses public sensitivity of the war. But not only that, during the war, it makes more senseless and less empathetic decisions. Before that, yes.
If you have nerve damage right now, you can't feel pain anymore, you're saying that you're going to kill everyone. That's true. I have higher regards for you that you'll say you won't do so. And if you end up in a casket, your mother will still weep for you.
I'm not saying that I'll kill everyone in this room, but I'm saying that if there's someone goes through pain, I won't feel sympathy towards that, because I myself do not go through that pain. And that's the analogy here. That's why I'm saying my introduction was a clear answer to their question. So sit down. Now, then, let's move into the discussion of how do we actually win the war. We told you an important argument about why winning hearts and minds of the community. The lame response coming from the Brit was that Britain are more clever. That's why they use better strategy. No, the analogy here is that only when we feel pain of the war, that's the prerequisite for being culturally sensitive and recruiting and attracting more community allies here. Even if we don't do that, in the eyes of the community, our troops will be viewed as killing machines who can't sympathize with the pain. It's a totally different being, and that's something that we have to be worrying about. And yes, we may win in an effective way, but the question of whether that sacrifice was necessary, or was that war necessary in the first place, still remains. And that's why we think that in the effectiveness of war, we want to be outside actually takes the debate. Example here, in Rwanda when we had a Black Hawk Down mission, when soldier was dragged and felt pain, that was the main cause of pulling out of those troops because of the pain that they go through. We want to live in a world in such kind of sensitive and empathetic world. We do not want to live in the world of the opposition, no. Then let's move on to the impacts. Now they try to narrow down the discussion by saying this will be voluntary. No. We told you why this cannot be a choice. Because firstly, the pressure from the unique environment, being coherence, is actually important, vital in a military troops. But not only that, we think there's a problem with the model. There's a contradiction there. Because they said that training to endure pain won't be necessary. Which means the soldiers who have chose to go through this treatment will be receiving a separate training, or this is actually creating a divisive military troop. We think that's what the model fails in the first place. But if we look into the further impacts about PTSD on social acceptance, two responses. Firstly, we think there will be less of a social acceptance, because we think that people will view these people as different beings, more of a killing machine, someone who can't feel the basic feelings that I may go through, who can't sympathize with me. But second of all, about PTSD, we're not saying, they're blaming us when saying that let them feel pain and we will cure after. We're not saying that. We actually appreciate these soldiers because of the pain they go through. But more, that's why we think it's something necessary, because the trauma actually roots out from the pain that you go through, and the absence of PTSD will lead to more of a problem. That's why our arguments about whistleblower comes into place. If you don't feel guilt, which means they say that convention exists, but the problem is that no one will whistleblow. There's no one who feels guilt about it because they cannot sympathize with the pain of uses of mass murder destruction or those kind of like biological weapons that harm the lives of the community. That is why, Mr. Speaker, if we do not want to live in a... I'm finished.
Granting the previous close case of the opposition side,
Mr. Chair, we do understand that these people are quite charming and they're old, right? But generally speaking, we win today's debate. Firstly, let's take a look at the physical pain and emotional pain. We told you about the idea that if you realize pain, if you have physical pain, you can realize pain in others. You can identify the pain in others. Therefore, if you take it away, you lose the capacity of the person to empathize. Because you don't understand their pain, since you don't feel pain anyway, ladies and gentlemen, because you don't identify it. So it's hard for you to feel joy as well with the absence of pain. So essentially, what's going to happen here is that those people who are under PTSD, ladies and gentlemen, are pretty much the same complications that you will have if you actually don't have emotions. So what we're doing simply is that these people will also not have jobs and will also have like poor love life, ladies and gentlemen, because they're cold, because they're emotionless. They can't feel pain to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, the harms that they are claiming is actually particularly puny. But let's try to weigh today's debate. Let's try to weigh, ladies and gentlemen, the harms that they have and the harms that we have. In our side, we said that the military personnel will not feel pain. But this soldier, ladies and gentlemen, will become more dangerous to the people around him. It's just like having a person who has PTSD as well, because you took away their capacity to feel pain and to feel suffering, therefore to feel other ranges of emotions, ladies and gentlemen. They're gonna be like cold lovers. They're gonna have a hard time, ladies and gentlemen, having the jobs at the same time, the same harms that you guys are claiming at that side. But we say that there are all massive harms when it comes to harms beyond the individual soldiers. We're talking about the capacity to do not meet military objectives. We're going to lose the war in the hearts and minds. Because the only thing that you're doing is that you're deepening the rhetoric that the West is inhuman. It's cold-blooded. It can't really feel the same amount of emotions. Because essentially, even if your policy is voluntary, most likely everybody would actually, undergo the same kind of approach. All the military personnel will go through it because they all don't want to feel the suffering, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day. But we've also told you that if it will be this particular technology is in the hands of terrorists, you're going to have like more ruthless terrorists, ladies and gentlemen, more suicide bombers who are willing to take away their lives, largely because they're not going to feel, the pain of dying anyway. We also talked to you about the idea of less whistleblowing, which they never really responded to at the end of the day. Gaeun also talked about the notion of commanders who just give instructions, which will be in contravention of the Geneva Convention, and nobody would just care about it, ladies and gentlemen, because they know that people wouldn't feel the pain and they wouldn't remember all these things at the end of the day. But let's take a look at a case of the affirmative defense. Essentially, the main case of affirmative defense is that this is an unnecessary pain that you're going to go through. But we say, ladies and gentlemen, that it is a necessary pain because the kind of pain that you're talking about has a value towards society in general. But that particular pain that you're talking about is only a limited interest that you're defending. And this is the second reason why we're going to lose today's debate. Because the only interest that you're defending is that of the soldiers, ladies and gentlemen. But what about the soldiers, the villagers that we talked about? What about the national security effort that we have to, in winning the war in general? What about, the lovers of the soldiers who will be felt left out, not just because you're becoming cold towards them as well, ladies and gentlemen? We say that the PTSD and all the harms they're claiming are mitigatable. You can have extensive support system, which they're only getting anyway in the status quo. You have more benefits, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day. Yeah, we do think, and we do commiserate towards the dog who actually died because you had PTSD or the people you're gonna kill, but compare the number of lives that you will lose if you make cold-blooded soldiers, ladies and gentlemen, because you're removing their capacity to feel and their capacity to feel pain at the end of the day. We say their PTSD is a puny problem compared to the massive harms that we're actually talking to you about. Come up with more benefits, ladies and gentlemen, which these soldiers are receiving at the end of the day. So we say, if we're gonna weigh, we do think that we're going to win today's debate because the harms that we pose, ladies and gentlemen, is greater. Having said all those things, I just want to thank everybody from Korea for having me here. So it was lovely and it was an entire CA. So having said all those things, thank you very much. There we go.
Alright, close the debate, Governor reply.
No, go say nice things too.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for accepting all three old debaters into your forum. More than honored. Okay. Oh yeah, I agree. All right, so let's look into the calculus on what standard you should apply. Because we agree with their side. If this is about saving more lives, and the side that proves who saves more lives, and that side wins, then we agree. And we think that our side has proved that we save more lives overall, so let me explain why. But let's first get to that aspect of no empathy towards others. Because their argument of like mass genocides and killing more people, like causing more wars, all depends on the notion that people would not be able to empathize, right? Let's look into that. We said, what we told you on our side of the house was that the ability to empathize is not dependent on your ability to feel pain, right? You grew up knowing what pain was. You grew up, I don't know, not getting shot, but when you fell off your first bike, for example, you did feel pain. Those accumulations make you understand and empathize what pain is. You know what pain is because you felt it before, which is why just because you eliminate that aspect doesn't mean you're unable to comprehend. That was the response that we constantly gave you, right? You learn about ethics, you learn that killing is wrong, you learn that it's unacceptable in society, you get education. Those were the responses. So we think that we adequately did respond to those points, right? Whereas they haven't provided us any link as to why just because people can feel pain, suddenly people would start killing other people, right? We think that was a leap too far. In terms of whistleblowing, we've also emphasized that if you commit such crimes in society, during wars, you are punished. Think about all the worst horrendous crimes that soldiers committed. They were all punished, right? Why would they suddenly risk that? They never explain. That's why people do have a moral conscience. Soldiers do have a moral conscience. That's why they will whistleblow. Those were the responses that we gave you. Just because you can't feel pain doesn't mean you don't know. That doesn't mean you don't fear losing your life, right? Just because you don't feel pain doesn't mean you don't fear losing your leg. That's why you will be able to emphasize, maybe not 100%, but maybe 99.9%, right? So we're saying those are the reasons why they will be able to feel empathy, and those are the things that we constantly emphasize. That's why their arguments of how they're going to go mass genocide and all those things do not stand. Another important argument that they gave, and I do agree it's an important argument for them, was that this allows citizens will no longer care about whether wars are necessary or whatnot. They will go into wars or whatnot. We gave you adequate responses. We said that they will still care because it's still their citizens, it's still their children, right? When they come back in dead bodies, they still care. They care about their lives, right? Which is why casualties matter for them. Moreover, they don't just go into wars because they don't feel pain. They think about important strategic things, such as whether this war is necessary to prevent a massacre or not, or whether we want to go into this war to prevent an enemy from attacking our ally or not. Those kind of calculuses were predominant, never responded, right? They never told us why these calculuses will be more important than this one, which is why we think in terms, that argument doesn't stand. Drones, Seth told you that this was distant from war, it's fundamentally different. I don't understand what this argument was, wearing the hats together with the local people, and we will be having still soldiers playing with these people and whatnot, right? So yeah. But what did we talk about? We talked about reducing unnecessary pain, and we think that's a very important aspect, right? Why would make them go through unnecessary torture when you can eliminate that? Isn't that humane? During wars, as we constantly emphasize, when your fellow soldier is dying, we reduce the pain by killing them, right? That's what we do. Military operations become much more efficient. And that's the important point. When they become much more efficient, that means you're able to save more lives quicker. That means you're able to prevent wars quicker. You can put wars and end wars much quicker. You're able to concentrate. And the purpose of the war, as we constantly emphasize, is usually about that, which is why we save more lives. PTSD. When they come back home, they can become a husband again. They can become wives again. They can have a family again. they can have a job again, and that's important for their happiness. How dare they say that's not important?
Here, here.
How dare they say we should rely on current treatment, which is currently ineffective? We say, let's see.